They also have another tree or a shrub in the back here, which is called bladdernut. Is there anyone who grows that one in their garden? You don't have it, Johan? No? None of you? Yeah, Staphylea pinnata. This is the European bladdernut, and I have a tendency to talk a bit about it because it's a really interesting forest garden plant for several reasons. For one thing, it is a very old, useful plant. It's not a wild plant in that sense. It's been used by humans for probably 10, 20,000 years. There's a lot of Stone Age remnants from Central Europe where they found remnants of bladdernut nuts, so people were consuming this as a crop. It's not very high yielding, but it's very tasty. I can show you what it looks like. It's very rich in fats and protein, and it's, as you see from the fruit and also the way the shrub looks here, it's quite ornamental. So it kind of combines edibility and ornamental values. It has beautiful flowers, which also are edible. And then in Georgia, they like one of the national dishes in Georgia is fermented bladdernut flowers. I've just had 2 flowers on my bladdernut bush, so I haven't really fermented those. I wanted to get nuts, but I'm really looking forward to that. Just harvesting those flowers and making this fermented thing from the flowers. And you can also eat the young shoots of it, and then you have these nuts, of course. And I don't think it's botanically a nut. Correct me if I'm wrong. It would be something else. And I don't use it as a nut either. I sometimes harvest these in the fall, and then you have these nuts that are really, really hard. If you crack them with a hammer, it's going to go into 1,000 pieces, and you have to kind of scrape out the nuts. It's really oily, really nice tasting, sweet taste, almost like sweet peas, taste-wise, but it's really hard to extract them, so it's just a nibble, a quite annoying nibble. So when we harvest them late from those bushes that we know of that are a bit older than ones we have, we started to put them in the oven and just dry them for 5 minutes in 140 degrees, and then the nut shrinks a bit and loosens from the shell, and then you can crack it with a hammer, and you have small peas rolling out, and there's nice, sweet, and very fatty. But even better is when you harvest them unripe, as you would do with peas as well. They're always unripe when you harvest them green. If you leave them for long, they get really hard. It's the same with the bladdernut. So this is really for me, this is the actual pea shrub, the perennial pea shrub that has excellent nutrient values too. It's well documented that it's not toxic, opposed to the Siberian pea shrub, which probably is toxic in the long run. And it's also very nice tasting. So in the middle of July or something like that, you can harvest them before the shell turns hard. It's really nice and soft, and you can use it as you would use peas. It's not as high yielding as a patch of peas, of course, but it's a very nice addition to the diet. And it's also part of a very strange, obscure plant family, so it doesn't really have any diseases or pests. So it's quite healthy, quite nice. Perfect forest garden plant to me.
So this is Euroopan kotapähkinä suomeksi in Finnish.
Thanks. Yeah, if you're unsure about the Finnish names, just ask those guys. They can tell you. So I can't expect everyone to know the English names either. I had to look them up myself yesterday when I was translating these slides. The next natural blueprint, so to speak, that I want to talk about is I don't know exactly, it depends on which book you read, whether it's a woodland or a shrubland. When I think woodland, I think of these English gardens that are really green and lush, and that's not what I mean with this image. And the shrubland, if you look in one book, it says it's just shrubs, but that's not what I mean either. In Swedish it's buskskog, which is basically the shrub forest, which means that it's a shrub-dominated forest type. Anyhow, we don't have to talk about definitions here. You'll soon understand what I mean. This is a picture taken in one of those apple forests in Kazakhstan, in Central Asia. And when you walk around there, I haven't been there unfortunately, but I have good friends who went there last autumn. And they told me everything about this ecosystem, showed me a lot of pictures and some videos, and I think there's a video on YouTube as well where they kind of show around in this forest, a 10-minute videos. The Danish guys Myris Permaculture How. I can write up the address later on if you like. In these forests, and they're basically natural. It's natural, large scale, on a scale of thousands of hectares, edible forests. And in this area, it's a bit too dry for like real forests to be able to develop. There's not enough moisture, but where there is moisture, you'll find big trees like pear trees and apple trees, which are the dominant species here. And then where it's a bit too dry, you'll have maybe cherry plants and other shrubs. And in the really dry parts, it's more like grass and different herbaceous plants. In the understory, you would find salvia and thyme and oregano, those kinds of species. You also have hops climbing up on all of this. You have grapes, wild grapes climbing up on this. You see some kind of allium that is overflowered in this picture. And my friend said it's basically they had to look for species that were not edible. They had to really look hard to find species that were not edible. And this is a more or less natural ecosystem that kind of developed in this place over the course of millennia. And what is interesting with this, it's not very productive. Once again, biomass-wise, if you just look at how much biomass is being produced here, that's because it's so dry and so hot in the summer and cold in the winter. But it's extremely productive when it comes to biomass that's apt for human consumption, once again. And that's because there's not enough, as I said, there's not enough moisture in the ground for big trees, really big trees, to establish and have this kind of, this canopy which excludes the light from the low layers. Here the trees can develop big crowns, which means they can produce a lot of fruit year after year. And they're also quite drought-resistant species, of course, these ones. And I haven't been there, but I've seen a similar woodland type of ecosystem a lot, and that's where I grew up in the south of Germany, just outside of Frankfurt. I was born and raised there. I lived there until I was 19, then I moved to Sweden when I was 21, and I never realized until a few years ago that I actually grew up in a large-scale edible landscape, and that's been kind of my blueprint for all of this gardening work that I've been doing, is basically learning from this site. So I go there as often as I can and wander around. And here, just to give you a bit of background on this is a very hilly area, lots of slopes, south-facing, north-facing, and everything in between. And this used to be a grape-growing region. And in the 1850s, this disease came, whatever it was called, that killed all the grapes. And then there was a priest in one of the neighboring villages here, and he said you have to diversify. You can't just put everything all the eggs in one basket. Don't grow just grapes, or don't grow just apples. And people were starting to plant apple trees instead of the grapes. You have to diversify. So he actually ordered plants from all over Europe, had them brought to this place by the railway, which was just being developed across the Alps and so on. So he made people plant plums, and he made them plant chestnut trees, walnut trees, and so on. So it's a really diverse landscape. It's mostly apple orchards to begin with, and some cherry orchards, but then he also helped the farmers to introduce a lot of other species. And then after the Second World War, people started to abandon these fields. It wasn't cool anymore, and definitely not necessary to grow your own food. It was kind of out of fashion to grow your own food. Reminded people of the war. So these plots started to grow over one after another. Some of them have been growing over for 100 years, some of them for 5 years. Some of them are still being maintained, and now there's been some kind of movement to recreate some of these plots. But many of them look like this. There you have this old apple tree, which is mostly dead. There's one stem growing out here, which is still alive. But many apple trees look like this now. They're too old. They're overgrown by these other species. There's lots of cherry plums, and that's the old rootstocks of the plum trees that the priest made the people, or inspired the people to plant. They spread by suckers, and it's a crazy diversity because they're all seed grown, these rootstocks. So you have all kinds of colors of cherry plums: yellow ones, almost black ones, red ones, orange ones, and they produce fruit at different times of the year over a very long period of time. Hazelnut wasn't grown, to my knowledge, on a commercial basis. It was wild hazelnuts coming into the system. They thrive here quite well. It's blackberries, and then some people in modern times have planted grapes again, and it's amazing. There's one grape here. It's climbing up in an old, really tall cherry tree, and then it turns around again and hangs down 50 meters up, then 50 meters down. It kind of went horizontal for some reason. 5 meters, just it's like this thick. You can almost walk on it. My kids can climb in it, and it's full of grapes. Sweet, really sweet seedless grapes. So it's a very fascinating environment, and it's really like a textbook in forest gardening, and especially succession. What happens if you have basically open landscape, grasslands and fields, you put in a lot of perennial edible species, and then you just walk away? What happens on different sites, on north-facing slopes and south-facing slopes, which species are dominant and so on. And at this stage, this is one of the oldest plots that has overgrown the most. It's at this stage, it really resembles this woodland or this apple forest from Central Asia. It's very similar to that structure-wise and also species-wise. But in Central Asia, succession stops at that point. There's not coming anything after the apple trees. They remain in the system. It changes, of course. It's dynamic. It's not a static system. It's stable, but it's dynamic stability, you can say. While here, succession is going to move on to the next stage. So it's going to be oaks coming in and maples coming in, and so on, taking over this. But it's really interesting to study this. And I just realized recently, as I said, that this has been my blueprint for my farming efforts. And just one walk in this, it was last August I was there, just 1 hour of walking around in these old plots gave me these fantastic grapes. We had like one bucket full of grapes. You couldn't pick it all. And up 50 meters up, there were like millions of them left for the birds and so on. Some plant trees still survive. This is the rootstocks. You can't really see the colors, but it's 3 or 4 different colors. Even peach trees showed up in this. Early ripening pears, hazelnuts, really big ones, different colors as well. Apples, of course, also very long harvesting season. And that's kind of how the kind of landscape I would like to participate in creating. And that's so nice to see so many people here who are kind of moving in the same direction. We can all create this together. We can't do this alone. This is on a massive scale. This is several thousand old fruit orchards that kind of have combined into one big edible landscape, really. It's on a landscape level.